Good morning and welcome to another stream by the ACT Chess Association covering their online events, which are at the moment being held on chess.com. My name is Sean Press. I organise these events on behalf of the ACT Chess Association and do the summaries the following day. I'm going to start with some good news. Tuggeranong Chess Club is starting up again face-to-face, coming up on this Monday, if I get my dates right, the 17th of August at their usual venue at Tuggeranong Vikings. Now, there will be some restrictions. I think they're restricting it to 20 players maximum, and the preference will be for players who are regular members of that chess club. So if you belong to other chess clubs in Canberra, don't go flooding down to Tuggeranong on the Monday night unless you have registered in advance and spoken to the organisers of that event. We're also making inquiries about reopening the Gungahlin Chess Club on Tuesday nights, and hopefully that will be opening up very soon. I dropped into the East Lakes Club, which is our regular venue, on Tuesday as they've reopened, and it looks like the club itself is open, and hopefully there'll be enough room for chess players. But back to the online chess. Last night was our Wednesday Rapid tournament, which is played with a time limit of 10 minutes plus 2 seconds per move. Maybe because everyone's looking forward to getting back to online chess, face-to-face chess. We didn't have a huge turnout. We had 10 players playing 5 rounds. It was won by Malik Amir on 4.5 out of 5, ahead of Wei Li on 4. And in third place was Nick Bear on 3.5. Now, instead of choosing one game to look at today, I'm going to choose 3 positions from the tournament, something different. But hopefully something instructive as well. And 2 of those actually involve Malik Amir, who had a couple of lucky escapes on his way. And sometimes you need luck to win tournaments. And certainly Malik had a bit of that up his sleeve. But nonetheless, if your opponents can't put you away, that's not your fault, that's their fault. So the first position we're looking at was between Malik and, if I've got it right, Stephen Mugford. And it was a very interesting king and pawn ending, because I was watching this live, and while watching it, I just assumed that that even though it looked dodgy for black, black had a way of holding this position. And we're just going to have a quick look now at just the last moves of the game, even though there's a lot in here. So at this point, the last black piece has just been captured. There was an exchange on c5, b takes c5. Now, on the one hand, it looks good for white, because the black king really can only shuffle back and forward between around d6 and e7 for the moment, because otherwise, if we go to d6 and take on d5, then the e7 pawn is just going to run. And this means that white has kind of an obvious plan, which is just to march the king up the board and eventually capture on c5 and then shepherd the pawns through. But there's a reason why this plan doesn't work, as we're about to see. So king went to f2, first move in the plan, and g5 is the right idea here. And the point with this is that if the king goes too far across, these massive pawns on the king side are going to force a pass pawn, and that will leave black in trouble. Just making sure my screen updates as well, because I'm going to juggle positions, and there's always some technical issues that I never quite get right here. But after g5, let's just have a look if the king just goes charging across. So g3, king d6, as said before, king d3, a6 for the want of a move to stop the king running around, but that doesn't matter. b3, h5, h4, for example. h4 here is one idea. And the king goes back to e7. I'm just going to look at this line straight up. King c4, king d6. And if we try something like e7 here to try and distract the king, we go king e7, king takes e5. And at first glance, it looks like this is okay for white. White's just going to use the pass d pawn and clean up either on the queen side. But after f4, we've suddenly got a problem for white, that is. This pawn's moving up the board, threatening to g4. Then the pawn goes to f3, and we've created a pass pawn of our own, and the king has to start running back to stop that. And I've got a very long line here which kind of explains Not completely accurately, but just essentially the worst that can happen. So the king suddenly sees the danger and runs back. So we F3 exclamation mark move in this position. Now G4 is okay, but F3 is even more direct because after pawn takes pawn, G takes H, King E3, and Black actually has the sneaky idea of actually not pushing the H pawn at this point. You play G5 here, A5 here to stop B4. And then when the king goes back to round it up, this king just goes like charges across. King G2, and then we just move up, head in this direction. And it turns out that even though this position looks equal, Black is just one move ahead. King B5 here, and let's just have a look at this pawn race. White has one more move to make a queen, but it's Black's move, and Black just plays queen G7. Now, I'm not going to go all the way through the ins and outs of this ending, and in fact, there's another post on YouTube that I've done for junior players, but you're most welcome to have a look at it, where I think I have analysed this ending in a little bit of detail. Now, I've left out massive numbers of moves, I've left out lots of alternatives, but essentially, the key idea here is this one here, is essentially you can, even though that you've got double pawns, you can create a pass pawn, and that forces the the white king to come running back. But let's go back to H4 here. If we play King D6 here and E7 doesn't work, another try is something like King C3, but again, F4 is not bad. And after F4 is bad at this point, I should say, I've just realized. Because after King D3, the idea now is that the king has access to F5 and the king's going to run through to that. And we're going to see that later in the game, by the way. The other thought is to play A5 here for the want of a move. And after King C4, King E7, takes and takes. King takes C5, and we'll just see a similar idea here. F4, king back at D6, king here, and then king runs back to D4. And this position actually is winning for white as well. So there's only one real winning line in that position after King E3 for black. But instead, none of that got played, by the way. I was only showing that to demonstrate the basic ideas of creating pass pawns, outside passes, and distracting your opponent's king with one of your pass pawns while you go and take all their pawns. H4 was played, a bit dubious. The right move for white would have been F4 here, because after H takes, King F3, H5, King E4, you can play King F6, which is an excellent move, because it stops the black king basically invading in the position, the white king, invading on F5, and eventually the king has to retreat. The worst case scenario is if you don't, you end up with too many pass pawns coming down the board for black, because black will just use the 3 pawns against the 1 pawn to create a passer. So F4, you can play B3, and then we just go G4 here. And then again, this should be enough to draw the position. King E2, F5, A5, king here, and we're just shuffling back and forward now. Then you go here, and G3 is a nice move here. Because the king has to come back because G2 will make a queen, and then F4 just holds everything. Can't take the pawn, of course, because G2, G1 is a queen, and now the king just simply has to go back to E2 and hang around on the king side, and black can just continue shuffling back and forward, and that would certainly be a draw. So F4 would have been a draw, but nonetheless, King D6 was played. It's still not that bad for black just yet. I still thought there was ability to hold here. King E7, King E2, again F4, again same idea works. It works right now. You'll see it doesn't work later, but it does work right now. H5 was a little bit dubious because it let the position slip. After King D3, I think King D6 can hold. King here, King E7. The engine that I had running, which are notoriously bad at endgames, by the way, kept arguing that white was a lot better in this position, but looking down the line, it just was, white was still shuffling pieces around without making any progress. Unfortunately, after King D3, the big mistake was F4. And this is where finally black went wrong in this position, because it now lets the king get to F5. If black had another move and was able to play F5 in this position, it'd all be fine. Well, actually it wouldn't be, because a pawn takes pawn. But the idea was that because this king can now get to E4 and then F5, it's all over. king e4, king d6, king f5, king back to e7, h takes, and of course king takes, and all the pawns fall, and black loses in this position. So it was a bit of a shame because g5 was the right idea to try and hold the draw. It just kind of went a bit south after that. And white certainly wasn't testing black to the extent that they need to be tested. So again, the lesson out of that game, of course, is king and pawn endings are tricky, and you've got to just look for your pawn breaks when you can. So that was the first game that I wanted to look at from last night. And so I'm just going to jump to the next position, and hopefully this will come up, and it has come up on the screen, which is fantastic. And hopefully, if I do this right, I will get, yep, so on the right position here. As I said, technically this can be a little bit of a challenge for me. So, moving on to this next position. This wasn't a very lucky escape. And the lesson from this position, to be honest, was if you don't see an idea the first time, often you don't see it at all. Okay, so back and forth, ding-dong attack. It looks like black is starting to crash through, but blundered terribly with f takes g3 in this position here. Because what black missed, and it turned out that unfortunately white missed it as well, is after rook f8, bishop g8, because otherwise it's mate, queen a2. And because the bishop is pinned, okay, it can't capture the queen. And in fact, you're just simply threatening rook takes or queen takes mate in this position. You can try and scramble with g takes h2, but after king f1, using the pawn as a shield, the only move that black really can play in this position is queen here. And then after this move, rook takes f7, rook takes f7, and white is just winning in this position. Even though it's a rook and 3 pawns for the queen, white's going to clean up pretty quickly here. But white missed that idea and took on e5 instead. After g takes h2, king h1, black kind of still missed the fact that their back rank was incredibly weak. Now, whether it was a bluff and decided they were losing, I'm not sure, but h5 was the move here because suddenly the king's got h7 to move to, and pretty much out of danger. But black charged on with rook d2. Looks like a fantastic move. But again, the idea of rook f8 still works here. Bishop f g8 and then queen b3. And again, how are you going to get out of mate? But instead, queen went to a3. And then black went rook takes g2. Now, I keep thinking this might well have been a bluff. Again, I'm not 100% sure. But certainly it gave black, I suppose, the win that black ended up with, even though they were substantially worse in this position. So queen a8, saw this while I was watching the game, bishop to g8, but the move that I spotted that unfortunately white didn't spot was queen takes g8, because after king takes, this is just mate. Instead, rook f8 with the idea of trying to mate next move, but it all just goes south now because black just plays rook g1 check here, and this is an excellent find. After bishop takes, h takes g1, 2 queens is always nice, king takes c1, and then you've got the discovered check. On e7, king goes to f1, take on f8, there's no mate, you're suddenly 2 pieces up. The queen can grab one of those pieces, but then after queen f7 check, the force of queens is, swap of queens is forced, and after this resigns because the bishop's just going to outplay. King e3, king g8 now resigns. And it's a bit of a shame that white didn't spot that, but I suspect that once white had failed to see rook check, followed by attacking the pinned bishop early on, it was very difficult for white to come back to that idea as well. So there's a lesson there as well. It's one of the reasons why chess engines are a lot stronger than humans, is we don't get trapped by our own plans. Chess engines constantly reassess what moves they're going to play. Humans just go, this is my line and I'm just going to play down it. Finally, very last position I'm going to look at today, just for funs. And I've just got to find it again. Okay, just had a nice finish here. Some of you have seen this idea before, and lots of you, I'm assuming, have seen this idea before. But this is the one that we're going to choose today. Yep, and I'll just choose the game now. I've just brought it up on my screen, and I've just got to find it on my desktop. And it was between Tim Pearce and Nick Bear, and it was the last round game of the tournament last night, and the win for Nick Bear resulted in a third place for him. So basically, Rook C2 has just been played, and Tim decided to go for the material imbalance. Takes, took the rook. So it's 2 rooks for the queen. Not a bad arrangement, especially with an extra pawn. Knight goes back to d4. Rook check, drives the king away. Rook g6 is a nice move because you want to try and imprison the king at this point. Queen a5 was played, threatens the knight, and I suspect White must have been in time trouble here because rook takes d6 is a good move. It protects the knight, picks up another pawn. Instead, brought the rook over hoping for a mate, because certainly there is a mating net based on playing one rook to g8 and then the other rook to g7, and the king has no squares. The drawback in this plan, of course, is that the knight was hanging. Queen takes d5. So rook g7, king f8, pawn to f6. Maybe we can get a queen. Queen takes f3. Rook g8 check, king f7. And while I was looking at this, I did have a quick look at the line. Rook g7, king takes f6, but rook f8 to win the queen doesn't really help because king takes g7, rook takes f3, knight takes f3. And you count the pieces and you realize black's ahead a piece and should be able to win this. But rook g7, king f6, rook g8. And this is where the tactics kick in. The idea is to play rook f8 to win the queen and go up, stay up the exchange. But it's black's turn, and black now sets up a very nice checkmate. A lot of you have seen this before. It's known as Philidor's Legacy, but having seen it in the wild last night, I thought I'd show it to you today. First move, queen e4 check, queen d3 check would also work here. If you play king c1, you just get mated straight away. Thanks for coming. So you go to the corner. King a1. Knight c2 is the next move. King to b1. And the key move here is knight to a3 double check. So because you're in check from 2 pieces at once, you can't block, you can't capture, so the knight can't be captured. If you play king to c1, queen c2 is mate, so you go king to a1 again, and then of course, those of you know the trick here is you sacrifice your queen on b1. And after rook takes b1, knight c2 is checkmate because the king is in the corner, surrounded by all his own pieces. So very nice find. Nick, I think, spotted that one a few moves out. And realised that once they could get the check on e4 or d3 that this was going to be the mate as well. So a nice win for Nick there. Unfortunate loss for Tim. I think time trouble might have had something to do with it. Although, if I can remember the game correctly, Nick might have even had less time than Tim by the time it was all run and done. So thanks for tuning in. That was from last night's ACT Chess Association Wednesday events. Following up on the announcement that Tuggeranong Chess Club are going to be back on Monday nights. That means I'm not going to run the Blitz event on Monday nights anymore. Numbers for that event were reasonably small, and I don't want to clash with chess clubs that are meeting face-to-face. So the Monday night Blitz for now is not running, and hopefully won't run again, fingers crossed, if you understand what I'm saying there. I have been asked to maybe move it to another night. I'm not planning to do that at this point, just because evenings are quite busy for me. Online Chess Olympiad is the main thing that's keeping me awake at nights. But even when all the chess clubs go back, the one night that probably will remain free is Wednesday night. So I'm thinking that the Wednesday Rapid, which is not a bad tournament, people seem to like it, might actually be an ongoing thing. And we might just run that once a week online, just for people who enjoy playing this sort of chess as well. So that was it from last night's event. My name's Sean Press. I do run these events on behalf of the ACT Chess Association and do these summaries. I will also mention that I've suddenly discovered another technical tweak that I can now use, that instead of just leaving them on Twitch and then having them disappear after a fortnight, I'm now able to transfer them across to YouTube, to my channel on YouTube, which also is Sean Press. And they stay there, hopefully, forever. So if you want to watch these a few months from now, knock yourselves out. So until, what am I thinking? Oh, until tomorrow after the ACTCA standard. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you then.